Hey, family. Welcome to Mr. Gray Family, where every story begins with us. Matthew didn't realize his hands were shaking until the phone nearly slipped from his grip. He stood outside his building, the cold Pittsburgh air pressing against his face, but he barely felt it. His attention was locked on one thing, his screen. Rebecca. Pick up, he muttered, pacing a few steps, then stopping, then pacing again like his body couldn't decide what to do. The call rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. He pulled the phone away slowly, staring at it like it had just told him something he didn't want to hear. No, he whispered under his breath, already hitting redial. This time, it didn't even ring. Straight to voicemail. That's when something shifted. Not panic, not fully, but enough to make his chest tighten in a way that felt unfamiliar, uncomfortable. Rebecca always answered. Even when she was busy, she would send a quick message. Even when she was tired, she would pick up just to say, "I'll call you back." But now, nothing. Matthew turned in a slow circle, scanning the quiet street like she might somehow be standing there, like he had just missed her by seconds. His jaw tightened. He checked the time of her call again. It hadn't been that long ago, but somehow, it felt like he was already too late. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. "I should have answered," he said, this time louder, like saying it out loud might change something. But it didn't, because deep down, a thought had already settled in. This wasn't just a missed call. It was a moment, and he had let it pass. I needed you not to answer." Rebecca's voice was calm. Too calm. Matthew stood in front of her, trying to process what she had just said, but it didn't land all at once. It settled slowly. The kind of sentence that doesn't hit your ears first, it hits somewhere deeper. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice quieter now, like he already knew he wasn't going to like the answer. Rebecca looked at him, not angry, not emotional in the way he expected, just clear. "If you had picked up." She paused for a second, choosing her words carefully. "I think I would have kept pretending everything was okay." Matthew didn't respond, because for the first time, he wasn't searching for the right words. He was searching for where things actually went wrong, and that was the problem. He couldn't find a single moment. Welcome to Mr. Gray Family, a storytelling universe built for people who crave meaning, emotion, and unforgettable narratives. Here, every story begins with a spark, and ends with a feeling you'll carry long after the video ends. Love, betrayal, family, secrets, lessons. It's all here, wrapped in immersive narration that makes you forget everything else. If you're searching for stories that pull your heart, challenge your mind, and keep you coming back, subscribe now. Your story begins the moment you choose to stay. He ignored one call, and it cost him everything. Have you ever told yourself, "I'll call back later," not realizing that later might come too late? Not because something dramatic happened, but because something quiet changed. A shift you didn't notice in the moment, but couldn't undo afterward. Because sometimes it's not the big mistakes that break things. It's the small ones, the ones that feel harmless, the ones you don't think twice about. Stay with me, because what Matthew realizes next, it's not just about that call. It's about everything that led to it. And before we go any further, if you've ever experienced a moment you wish you could take back, go ahead and like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe, because stories like this, they hit differently when they feel a little too real. Long before that night, before the unanswered call, before the silence that followed, Matthew's life looked like something people envied. If you saw him from a distance, everything made sense. The suits, the composure, the way people listened when he spoke. He had built something solid, something that didn't crack under pressure. At 37, Matthew wasn't just successful. He was respected, and in his world, respect mattered more than anything. But the truth about lives like his is simple. What people see isn't always what's real. Pittsburgh had a quiet rhythm in the early mornings. Bridges stretching across the rivers, light settling slowly over the city, people moving through routines they didn't question anymore. It was the kind of place where you could tell a lot about someone just by how they spent their mornings. And Matthew, his mornings were controlled. Everything scheduled, everything intentional. There was no room for confusion. No room for things slipping through his hands. Rebecca was different. She didn't move through life like it needed to be managed. She felt things as they came, spoke when something mattered, showed up for people without calculating what she would get in return. Where Matthew built structure, Rebecca created connection. And somehow, those two worlds found each other. At first, it made sense. More than that, it worked. Because what Matthew didn't realize at the time was this: the thing that made Rebecca different was the same thing that made her irreplaceable. But differences don't disappear. They wait, quietly, until the moment you stop paying attention. And Matthew, he didn't notice when things started changing. Not at first, because when life feels stable, you don't question it. You assume it will stay that way until one day you look up and realize something important has already slipped out of place. Matthew's mornings always started before the city fully woke up. Not because he had to, because he preferred it that way. There was a certain clarity in those early hours, before calls started coming in, before emails stacked up, before people began needing things from him. He stood by the wide glass window of his downtown Pittsburgh penthouse, one hand resting lightly against the frame, the other holding a cup of coffee that had already gone untouched for a few minutes. Below him, the city moved slowly. Bridges stretched across the water, cars passing in steady lines, people walking with purpose or routine, depending on who you watched closely. Matthew observed it all without expression. Not cold, not distant, just controlled. That was the word people often used when they described him. Controlled. His movements, his tone, even his reactions. Everything felt measured. Nothing wasted, nothing unnecessary. By the time most people were just getting out of bed, Matthew had already reviewed reports, responded to key emails, and mapped out his day down to the hour. There were no surprises in his schedule. He didn't leave space for them. At 37, he had built something that demanded precision. His company wasn't just growing. It was expanding into spaces that required attention, decisions, and timing that couldn't afford hesitation. People relied on him, not emotionally, strategically, and Matthew understood that difference clearly. At exactly 7:15 a.m., his phone buzzed. He glanced at it once. "Send it through," he said, already knowing who it was before the voice responded on the other end. "Yes, Matthew, it's in your inbox now." He ended the call without another word. Not rude, just efficient. His assistant had once told someone, quietly but honestly, he doesn't waste time explaining things he's already decided. And that was true. Matthew didn't second-guess himself often, because second-guessing meant hesitation. And hesitation, in his world, cost more than just time. When he stepped into his office later that morning, everything was already in place. Clean desk, organized files, a space that reflected exactly how he thought. Structured, intentional, predictable. People greeted him as he walked in. He acknowledged them with a nod, sometimes a brief morning, but never stopped long enough for conversation. Not because he didn't care, because he didn't see the need. Meetings followed, one after another, each one with a clear objective, clear expectations, clear outcomes. Matthew didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. When he spoke, people listened, not out of fear, out of certainty. They trusted that when Matthew said something, it had already been thought through. "Delay the rollout," he said during one meeting, reviewing a projection chart. A pause. Someone across the table leaned forward slightly. "We're still within acceptable margins." Matthew shook his head once. "Margins shift," he replied calmly. "Timing matters more." The room went quiet. Decision made. That was how things worked around him. No drawn-out debates, no emotional reactions, just direction. By mid-afternoon, his schedule hadn't slowed. If anything, it had tightened. Calls, briefings, approvals. Everything moved forward because he moved it forward. From the outside, it looked like control, success, stability, and in many ways, it was. Matthew had built a life where very little slipped through his hands. But control has a cost, not one that shows up in reports, not one that people can measure. It shows up in smaller ways, in moments that don't seem urgent, in conversations that feel optional, in calls that can be returned later. Matthew didn't ignore things, he prioritized them. And over time, Some things quietly moved lower on that list. Not intentionally, not consciously, just gradually. By the time the day ended, Matthew was still composed, still focused, still in control. But there was one thing about control that Matthew hadn't fully understood yet. It works best with systems, with numbers, with decisions that follow logic, but people don't always fit into that structure. And when you start treating them like they do, you don't notice what's changing, not right away. Rebecca's mornings didn't begin with silence. They began with sound, not loud in a chaotic way, just alive. Music played softly from her kitchen speaker, something warm and familiar, the kind of song that didn't demand attention but filled the space gently. The smell of something cooking, usually something simple, drifted through her apartment, mixing with the rhythm of her day before it even fully started. She moved without rushing, not slow, just present. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and she glanced at it briefly before picking it up. A message from someone in her program. "Hey, Miss Rebecca, do you have a minute later?" She smiled faintly, already typing back. Of course. Always. That was who she was. Not someone who scheduled connection, someone who made space for it. By the time she stepped outside, the city felt different around her, where Matthew saw movement and structure. Rebecca noticed people. The woman unlocking her shop door, humming under her breath. The man helping his son adjust his backpack before school. The quiet exchanges most people walked past without thinking twice. She noticed them because she cared, not out of habit, out of instinct. At the community center, her presence was felt before she even spoke. "Miss Rebecca." A young voice called out the moment she walked in. She turned immediately, her face lighting up without effort. "Hey, you're early today," she said, crouching slightly to meet the girl at eye level. "I finished my homework," the girl said proudly. Rebecca nodded, impressed. "Let me see it later, okay? I want to check everything." That was how she worked. Not distant, not authoritative, involved. Her day didn't follow a strict schedule. It shifted depending on what people needed. Sometimes it was helping with schoolwork. Sometimes it was listening, really listening. "Do you think things actually change?" One of the teenagers asked her that afternoon, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed like he didn't fully believe in anything he couldn't see. Rebecca didn't answer right away. She leaned against the desk beside him, thoughtful. "They do," she said finally. "Just not always as fast as we want." He shrugged. "Feels like it stays the same." Rebecca nodded slowly. "I get that," she replied. "But that doesn't mean you stop trying to change it." There was no lecture in her tone, no pressure, just honesty. That's what made people trust her. She didn't speak at them. She spoke with them. By the time evening approached, Rebecca felt it. That quiet exhaustion that didn't come from doing too much physically, but from carrying pieces of other people's lives with her. She didn't complain about it, but she felt it. She sat in her car for a moment before starting the engine, just breathing, letting the day settle. Her phone rested in her hand, her thumb hovering over the screen like she was deciding something, not urgently, just carefully. Moments like this used to be simple. She would call Matthew, not because she needed advice, not because she needed solutions, just because hearing his voice used to feel like a place she could rest for a minute. She leaned her head back slightly against the seat, thinking. The difference between her world and Matthew's wasn't something she used to question. At the beginning, it felt balanced. He brought structure. She brought warmth. He helped her see things clearly. She helped him feel things more deeply. It worked, because they met in the middle, but somewhere along the way, that middle started to shift. Rebecca didn't need constant attention. She wasn't asking for grand gestures. She just noticed small things, things most people would overlook, like how conversations ended quicker than they used to, how pauses stayed longer, how sometimes she would say something and wait just a little longer than usual for a response, not because Matthew didn't hear her, but because he wasn't fully there. She didn't bring it up immediately, not because she was avoiding it, but because she was trying to understand it first. That's who Rebecca was. She didn't react to everything. She processed it, felt it, tried to make sense of it before turning it into something bigger. But even the most patient people reach a point where understanding something doesn't make it feel any lighter. She looked down at her phone again. Matthew's name sat there, familiar, important, but lately, uncertain in a way she couldn't ignore anymore. Still, she pressed call, because part of her held onto something simple, not the past, not even expectation, just hope. They met on a night neither of them had planned to remember. Matthew had arrived late, not dramatically late, just enough to slip into the charity event without drawing attention. He preferred it that way. Walk in, do what was expected, leave without unnecessary conversation. The room was filled with quiet conversations, soft laughter, and the kind of polished interactions that followed a pattern. People shook hands, exchanged names, and spoke in careful tones that never revealed too much. Matthew moved through it with ease. A nod here, a brief smile there. Everything controlled, everything familiar. Rebecca wasn't paying attention to any of that. She stood near one of the tables, focused on the group she came with, checking in, adjusting things, making sure everyone felt comfortable. Her attention stayed on people, not the room. "Did you eat yet?" she asked one of the teenagers beside her. He shook his head. She picked up a plate, handing it to him. "Start with this. You've been quiet all evening." "I'm just not used to this," he admitted. Rebecca smiled. "That's okay. You don't have to be. Just be yourself." Matthew noticed her because she wasn't trying to be noticed. While others kept glancing in his direction, waiting for an opportunity, Rebecca didn't look at him once. That stood out. Their first interaction wasn't planned. It happened near the refreshment table. Matthew reached for a glass at the same time Rebecca did. Their hands paused briefly. Not touching, just close enough to acknowledge the overlap. "Go ahead," Matthew said, stepping back slightly. Rebecca glanced at him, then at the glass, then back at him. "You sure?" she asked. He nodded once. "Yeah." She picked it up, then smiled lightly. "Thanks." There was a short pause. Matthew could have walked away. That would have been the normal move. Instead, he stayed. "You're not really into this kind of thing, are you?" Rebecca asked casually, taking a sip. Matthew raised an eyebrow slightly. "What makes you say that?" She shrugged. "You look like you're already planning your exit." For a second, he just looked at her. Then, unexpectedly, he let out a quiet laugh. "That obvious?" "A little," she said, smiling. That was the first moment something shifted. Not big, just different. "What about you?" he asked. "You seem comfortable here." Rebecca shook her head. "I'm not here for this," she said, gesturing lightly around the room. "I'm here for them," she added, nodding toward the group she came with. Matthew followed her gaze. "You work with them?" "Yeah," she replied. "Community program. Education support." He nodded slowly. "That's important." Rebecca looked at him, studying his tone for a second. "You don't have to say that like it's part of a speech," she said. Matthew blinked, slightly caught off guard. "I wasn't." She smiled. "Relax. I'm just saying, you can be normal for a second." That was new for him. Most people adjusted to him. Rebecca didn't. Their conversation didn't last long, but it stayed with him. Later that night, as Matthew was preparing to leave, he found himself looking around the room again. Not for investors, not for business contacts, for her. He saw her near the exit, talking to one of the kids, making sure everyone was ready to go. He walked over. "Hey," he said. Rebecca turned. "Hey." There was a brief pause. Not awkward, just real. "I didn't get your name earlier," Matthew said. "Rebecca," she replied. He nodded. "Matthew." She tilted her head slightly. "I know." He smiled faintly. "Right." Another pause. Then he said, "Do you always call people out like that?" Rebecca crossed her arms lightly, amused. "Only when they need it. And I needed it." She looked at him for a second, then nodded once. A little. Matthew let out a small breath, almost like he was thinking something through. "Fair enough," he said. That should have been the end of it. A brief interaction, nothing more. But it wasn't. Their conversations continued. First, through occasional messages, then longer calls. Then, moments where time stretched without either of them noticing. Matthew found himself doing something unfamiliar, slowing down. "You don't always have to have an answer, you know," Rebecca said during one of their calls. Matthew leaned back in his chair, phone to his ear. "I usually do," he replied. Rebecca laughed softly. Yeah, I figured. With her, things weren't structured. Conversations didn't have clear outcomes. They just happened. And Matthew realized something he hadn't expected. He liked that. He didn't have to be precise. Didn't have to lead every interaction. Didn't have to control how things unfolded. He could just respond. And Rebecca? She liked that version of him. Not the one people respected. The one who paused before speaking. The one who admitted when he didn't know something. The one who laughed a little easier. That's what made it work. Not perfection. Not similarity. But balance. Two different worlds, meeting somewhere in between. And for a while, that space felt steady. The first time Matthew attended one of Rebecca's family gatherings, he wasn't sure where to stand. Not physically. He knew where to stand. It was everything else. The house was already full when they arrived. Music played from somewhere in the background. Not loud enough to interrupt conversation, but present enough to shape the mood. Voices overlapped. Laughter came easily. Someone called out from another room before they even fully stepped inside. Rebecca, you finally made it. She smiled instantly, slipping into that space like it belonged to her. It's been a long week, she replied, stepping forward to greet them. Matthew stayed half a step behind, observing. Matthew, come on, Rebecca said, reaching back slightly to pull him in. He nodded politely as people greeted him. Firm handshakes, quick introductions. Good to meet you. Nice to meet you too. But the conversations didn't stay formal. They moved fast. People talked over each other, jumped between topics, laughed mid-sentence, and picked conversations back up like nothing had been lost. Matthew followed as best as he could, but it didn't follow a structure he was used to. So, what exactly do you do again? Someone asked him casually. Matthew answered clearly, briefly. There was a pause, then another question. Different topic, different direction. No transition, just movement. Rebecca watched him for a second from across the room, not concerned, just aware. Later she walked over, handing him a plate. You're doing okay, she said quietly. Matthew glanced around, then back at her. I'm trying to keep up, he admitted. She smiled. You don't have to keep up. Just be here. That sounded simple, but for Matthew, it wasn't. Being present without control felt unfamiliar. At one point, a conversation near him grew louder. Not aggressive, just expressive. Two people disagreed about something, voices rising slightly, hands moving as they spoke. Matthew stiffened slightly, watching. Rebecca noticed. They're not arguing, she said softly. He glanced at her. Sounds like it. She shook her head. Give it a minute. A minute later, both of them laughed. The tension disappeared as quickly as it came. Matthew didn't say anything, but he registered it. A week later, Rebecca joined Matthew at one of his dinners. The setting was different. Quiet, measured, conversations spaced out with pauses. People waited, their turn to speak. Rebecca sat beside him, listening, adjusting. So, Rebecca, someone across the table said, what line of work are you in? She answered honestly, just like she always did. I work in community education programs. A polite nod. Important work, the person replied. Rebecca smiled slightly, but didn't continue. Not because she didn't have more to say, because the conversation had already moved on. She glanced at Matthew briefly. He didn't notice. He was focused on the discussion happening at the table. Later that evening, as they stepped outside, Rebecca exhaled slowly. That was different, she said. Matthew adjusted his jacket. How so? She looked at him, choosing her words carefully. Everyone talks like they're presenting something, she said. Matthew frowned slightly. They're just being clear. Rebecca nodded. I know. It's just quiet. There was a pause between them, not uncomfortable, but noticeable. These are the kinds of spaces I spend most of my time in, Matthew said. Rebecca looked at him. And the ones I'm in feel like a lot to you, she replied. Neither of them argued, because neither of them was wrong. But something had shifted. Not enough to cause conflict, not enough to raise concern, just enough to create awareness. And awareness, when left alone long enough, starts turning into distance. At first, nothing looked wrong. That was the problem. There was no clear moment where things broke. No argument, no sharp words, just Small changes. It started with timing. Rebecca would call. Matthew would answer. Just not immediately. "Hey, I'm in the middle of something," he would say, voice steady. "I'll call you back." "Okay," Rebecca would reply. And at first he did. But then the calls started coming later, sometimes much later. "Sorry, it's been a long day," he said one evening, finally calling back. Rebecca leaned against her kitchen counter, phone to her ear. "It's okay," she replied. "I figured." There was a pause, not because she didn't have anything to say, because she had already said it to herself hours ago. "How was your day?" Matthew asked. "It was good," she answered. And that was it. That used to be the question that opened everything. Now, it closed it. Matthew didn't notice. To him, the conversation was still happening. He had asked. She had answered. Nothing seemed missing. But for Rebecca, something had changed. A few days later, she called again. Matthew looked at his phone as it rang. Rebecca. He was in his office, reviewing numbers, focused. He let it ring once, twice, then picked up. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she replied, her voice softer than usual. "You caught me in the middle of something." He added quickly, "Can I call you back?" There was a short pause. Then, "Yeah, that's fine." This time, he didn't call back until the next morning. "Sorry about last night," he said. Rebecca was already out, walking toward the community center. "It's okay," she repeated. She had started saying that a lot. Not because everything was okay, because she didn't want to turn small moments into bigger ones. Their conversations became shorter, not intentionally. They just didn't stretch the way they used to. "You good?" Matthew asked one night. "Yeah," Rebecca replied. "You sound tired." "I am." "It's been a long day. Get some rest." "I will." Silence. Neither of them hung up immediately, but neither of them added anything else either. "All right," Matthew said finally. "Talk later." "Okay." The call ended. Rebecca stared at her phone for a second after the line went quiet, not expecting it to ring again, just noticing how quickly it had ended. She sat down slowly, exhaling. There was a time when conversations with Matthew didn't have clear endings. They faded. Now they stopped. Matthew, on the other hand, moved on to the next thing. Another email, another task, another decision. To him, nothing had changed in a way that required attention. He still called back, still checked in, still asked questions. But connection doesn't depend on effort alone. It depends on presence. And presence can't be scheduled. One evening, Rebecca tried again, not because she hadn't noticed the pattern, but because she wasn't ready to stop trying. "Hey," she said when he answered. "Hey," Matthew replied. There was noise in the background on his end. Voices, movement. "You busy?" she asked. "A little," he admitted. "I'm stepping into something in a minute." Rebecca nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "Okay. I won't keep you." "You sure?" he asked. "Yeah." A pause. "All right. I'll call you later," he said. This time, she didn't respond right away, not because she was upset, because she was thinking. "Okay," she said finally. After the call ended, she didn't put her phone down immediately. She held it in her hand, staring at the screen. Something felt different. Not dramatic, not loud, just distant. She thought about calling him back, just to say something small, something random, something that didn't matter. But she didn't, because for the first time, a thought crossed her mind that she hadn't allowed before. "I don't know if he would notice." That thought didn't come with tears. It came with stillness, and that stillness stayed. From that point on, Rebecca didn't stop calling, but she hesitated more. And Matthew? He didn't notice the hesitation, because from where he stood, everything still looked normal. Scarlett didn't enter Matthew's life in a way that felt significant. There was no moment that stood out, no introduction that carried weight. It happened the same way most things in his world did, through work. She was already in the room when Matthew walked in. A meeting. Late afternoon. A small group gathered around the table, screens open, conversations already halfway through when he took his seat. Scarlett sat across from him, composed, focused. She wasn't trying to stand out, but she didn't blend in either. When she spoke, it was clear, not rushed, not hesitant, just direct. If we move forward with that timeline, we're going to lose flexibility later, she said, glancing briefly at the data in front of her before looking up again. The room went quiet for a second. Matthew watched her, not because she challenged anything, because she didn't over-explain it. Explain, Matthew said. Scarlett nodded once, like she expected the question. She walked through her reasoning. Clean, structured, easy to follow. No unnecessary details. No trying to impress anyone. Matthew leaned back slightly as she spoke, listening. By the time she finished, the decision was already forming in his mind. Adjust the timeline, he said. Scarlett didn't react. No smile, no sign of satisfaction, just a small nod as she noted it down. That was the first thing he noticed about her. She didn't look for approval. After the meeting ended, people gathered their things, conversations breaking into smaller pieces. Matthew stayed seated for a moment longer, reviewing something on his tablet. You don't hesitate much, Scarlett said from across the table. He looked up. What do you mean? You make decisions quickly, she replied. Most people spend more time going back and forth. Matthew held her gaze for a second. Most people don't like being responsible for the outcome, he said. Scarlett considered that, then nodded slightly. Fair point. There was no attempt to extend the conversation, no awkward pause. She picked up her things and left. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Their paths crossed again, and again. At first, it stayed within work. Brief conversations, focused discussions, nothing outside of that space. But there was something about the way Scarlett moved through that environment. She didn't require adjustment. She already fit. You don't find this exhausting? Matthew asked one evening, as they walked out of a long meeting. Scarlett glanced at him briefly. What part? All of it, he said. The pace, the pressure. She shrugged lightly. It's predictable, she replied. Matthew looked at her. Predictable? Yeah, she said. If you understand how things work, it's not overwhelming. You just follow the structure. That made sense to him. Immediately, there was no need to explain further. That was the difference. With Rebecca, conversations opened things. With Scarlett, conversations confirmed things, and confirmation felt easier. They started having conversations that lasted a little longer, still professional, still within boundaries, but extended. Do you ever turn it off? Scarlett asked one night, referring to work. Matthew shook his head slightly. Not really. She nodded, like she understood, without needing more. That makes sense, she said. No follow-up question. No suggestion that he should. Just understanding. Matthew found himself staying a little longer after meetings. Not intentionally. It just happened. There was no pressure in those moments. No expectations. No emotional weight. Just conversation. And after days filled with decisions, responsibilities, and constant demands, that kind of simplicity felt comfortable. Meanwhile, nothing about his life had officially changed. He still went home, still spoke to Rebecca, still maintained everything the way it had always been. But something had shifted in a way that didn't require acknowledgement to exist. One evening, as Matthew sat across from Scarlett during a quiet dinner that had started as just a continuation of work, she said something that stayed with him. You don't seem like someone who complicates things, she said. Matthew looked at her. I don't see the benefit in it. Scarlett nodded. Exactly. That word lingered longer than it should have, because without realizing it, Matthew had started associating something. Rebecca felt like effort, not because she was difficult, because she required presence. Scarlett felt simple, not because she lacked depth, because she didn't ask for anything beyond the moment. And Matthew didn't question that difference. He accepted it, slowly, quietly. That's how it began. Not with a decision, not with intention, just with ease. Matthew didn't think of what he was doing as wrong. That thought never formed fully in his mind, not because he avoided it, because he didn't see a reason to. From where he stood, nothing had actually broken. There hadn't been a fight. No moment where Rebecca confronted him. No clear line that had been crossed. Things had just changed. He sat in his office one evening, long after most people had left, reviewing something on his screen that no longer held his full attention. His phone rested beside him, silent. Rebecca hadn't called that night. A few weeks ago, that would have stood out. Now, it didn't. Matthew leaned back slightly, exhaling as he ran a hand across his jaw. His mind shifted, not to work, not to numbers, but to something less structured. We're just in a different place, he thought. It wasn't defensive. It felt reasonable. People change. Relationships shift. That didn't automatically mean something was wrong. He picked up his phone, scrolling briefly before setting it back down again. Rebecca had been busy. He had been busy. That was the simplest explanation, and simple explanations worked best. Another thought followed. She understands how things are. That one settled more comfortably. Rebecca had always been patient, always supportive, never demanding, so in his mind, nothing he was doing required urgency. He still showed up, still maintained the structure of their relationship, still answered when it mattered. He wasn't disappearing. He wasn't neglecting everything. He was just adjusting. That's how he framed it. A shift in time, a shift in attention, not a loss. And when something doesn't feel like a loss, it doesn't feel like something that needs to be fixed. His phone buzzed. Scarlett. He picked it up immediately. Yeah? He answered. Did you see the update from earlier? Scarlett asked. I did, he replied. I'll review it tonight. There was a pause. You're still there? She asked. Yeah, long day. Matthew glanced at the empty office around him. Something like that. Scarlett didn't follow up with concern, didn't ask questions that required explanation. Send it back when you're done, she said. All right. The call ended. Matthew set the phone down again, staring at the screen for a second longer than necessary. That interaction felt simple, no effort, no need to explain anything beyond what was necessary. And without realizing it, he compared it, not consciously, just automatically. With Rebecca, conversations carried more context, more emotion, more expectation to be present. With Scarlett, there was none of that. And in a life where everything demanded something from him, that difference mattered more than he acknowledged. Matthew stood, walking slowly toward the window of his office. The city stretched out below him, steady, predictable. We're just growing apart, he thought. That sentence felt final enough to settle everything else. It removed responsibility, removed urgency, because if something is already changing, then you're not the cause, you're just moving with it. And Matthew believed that, not because he had examined it deeply, but because it made everything easier to accept. He didn't see himself as someone making a mistake. He saw himself as someone adapting, and that belief allowed him to keep going without stopping to question anything. Matthew didn't set out to divide his time. It happened without a clear starting point, no decision, no line crossed in a single moment. At first, it was just longer work days, meetings that extended into the evening, follow-ups that couldn't wait until morning. Running late tonight, he said one evening, phone pressed between his shoulder and ear as he moved through his office. Rebecca's voice came through, calm as always. Okay, don't stay too long. I won't, he replied. He meant it when he said it, at the time, but later came anyway. Across the city, Rebecca finished her evening quietly. Dinner sat untouched for longer than usual before she finally ate. The apartment felt still, not uncomfortable, just empty in a way she hadn't noticed before. Meanwhile, Matthew sat across from Scarlett. What started as a review meeting had shifted into something else, not labeled, not defined, just continued. You always stay this late? Scarlett asked, glancing at the clock briefly before looking back at him. Depends on the day, Matthew replied. She nodded. No follow-up, no concern. They spoke about work at first, then less about work. The shift wasn't obvious. There was no moment where either of them acknowledged it. Matthew found himself staying seated longer than necessary. Not because there was more to discuss, because there was no reason to leave. That became the pattern. Days were structured, focused, controlled. Evenings, less so. Rebecca still called, still checked in. Hey, she said one night. Matthew stepped away slightly from where he was standing. Hey, he replied. You home yet? She asked. Not yet. Still out. A pause. Everything okay? She asked. Yeah. Just finishing something up. That answer was technically true. All right, Rebecca said. I'll let you go. You don't have to. It's fine, she said, cutting in gently. Another pause. I'll talk to you later, Matthew said. Okay. The call ended. Matthew stood still for a second, phone still in his hand. Then he put it away, turned back, sat down again. Scarlett didn't ask who it was, didn't look at him with curiosity, didn't shift the tone. That made it easier. With Rebecca, moments carried weight. Even silence had meaning. With Scarlett, nothing needed to be explained. You always this focused? Scarlett asked casually. Matthew looked up. On what? Everything, she replied. He considered the question briefly. I don't like leaving things unfinished. Scarlett nodded slightly. That makes sense. That was all. No deeper conversation, no emotional direction, just acceptance. And Matthew leaned into that. He began splitting his time without thinking about it as a split. Morning, routine, work, structured. Rebecca, familiar. Evenings, flexible. Scarlett, easy. Nothing collided, because he kept everything separate. Rebecca never asked too many questions. Scarlett never asked any. That balance felt manageable, until it started becoming normal. One night, Matthew walked into his apartment, later than usual. The lights were dim. Rebecca sat on the couch, a book resting on her lap. She looked up when he entered. You're late, she said. Yeah, he replied, setting his keys down. Long day. She studied him for a second, not suspicious, just observing. You've had a lot of those lately, she said. Matthew loosened his tie slightly. Things are picking up. Rebecca nodded slowly. Okay. She didn't press. That made it easier, too. Matthew walked past her toward the kitchen. Did you eat? He asked. Yeah, she replied. Another pause. Good, he said. The conversation ended there, not abruptly, just naturally. And that's what made it difficult to recognize. Nothing felt broken. Nothing felt urgent. Just quieter. Later that night, Matthew checked his phone. A message from Scarlett. Did you get a chance to review that document? He responded immediately. Yeah. I'll send notes in the morning. A second later, thanks. Short. Simple. He locked his phone and set it down. Rebecca shifted slightly beside him on the couch. He glanced at her. You okay? He asked. Yeah, she said. She meant it. Or, at least, she chose not to say otherwise. Matthew nodded once, and just like that, the moment passed. That was how his life continued, not divided in a way that felt chaotic, divided in a way that felt controlled, and because it felt controlled, he never stopped to question it. Rebecca didn't wake up one day and decide something was wrong. It came to her in pieces, moments that didn't seem important on their own, but stayed longer than they should have. That morning started like any other. Music played softly in her kitchen. She moved between the counter and the sink, preparing something simple before heading out. Her phone rested nearby. She glanced at it once, then again. No new messages. She picked it up anyway, scrolled briefly, then set it back down. It wasn't about expecting something. It was about noticing the absence of it. Later that day, she sat across from one of the kids at the community center, helping with an assignment. Read that part again, she said gently. The girl nodded, trying again. Rebecca listened closely, leaning forward slightly, present, focused. You got it, she said with a small smile. Just slow down a little. The girl smiled back. Moments like that still felt the same, grounded, clear, but outside of those moments, something felt off. That evening, Rebecca and Matthew sat across from each other at the table. Dinner was simple, quiet. How was your day? Matthew asked. Rebecca looked up briefly. It was good, she said. A pause. She adjusted her fork slightly, then added, We made progress on the program. Matthew nodded. That's good. He didn't ask anything else. Rebecca waited. Not long, just enough. Then, she nodded once. Yeah. The conversation moved on. Matthew checked something on his phone briefly. Not for long, just a quick glance, but it was enough. Rebecca noticed. She didn't say anything. She took another bite, her attention drifting slightly. Not away from him, but inward. There was a time when she didn't have to think about conversations. They just happened. Now, she found herself choosing what to say. measuring it. Later that night, they sat in the living room. The television played quietly in the background. Rebecca turned slightly toward him. "I was thinking about expanding the program next year," she said. Matthew nodded without looking away from the screen. "That makes sense." She waited. Nothing followed. She opened her mouth slightly, like she was about to add something, then stopped. Matthew didn't notice. He leaned forward slightly, focused on what he was watching. Rebecca leaned back again. Slowly, the moment passed. That was when it became clear. Not suddenly, not painfully, just clearly. She wasn't being heard the same way anymore. And it wasn't because Matthew didn't care. He just wasn't there in the same way. The next day, she called him. "Hey," she said when he answered. "Hey," Matthew replied. "I've got a few minutes." A few minutes. That phrase stayed with her. She adjusted her grip on the phone slightly. "Okay," she said. She started talking. About her day, about something that had happened earlier. Halfway through her sentence, she paused, not because she forgot what she was saying, because something felt off. There was no response on the other end. Not interruption, not distraction, just absence. "Matthew," she said. "Yeah," he replied quickly. "I'm here." But it didn't feel like he was. Rebecca didn't continue where she left off. She didn't repeat herself. "It's nothing," she said instead. "You sure?" he asked. "Yeah." There was a short silence. "All right," Matthew said. "I'll call you later." "Okay." The call ended. Rebecca lowered the phone slowly. She sat there for a moment, not moving. That pause, the one where she stopped mid-sentence, stayed with her, not because of what she didn't say, because of what it meant. She stood up, walking toward the window. The city stretched quietly in front of her. For the first time, she didn't try to explain the feeling away. She didn't tell herself it was just a busy day. Didn't tell herself things would go back to normal. She just accepted what she felt. And that changed something. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Enough to stop reaching the same way. Enough to pause before calling. Enough to sit with her thoughts instead of sharing them immediately. That's how distance really forms. Not through arguments. Through moments like that. Moments where something small happens, and no one fixes it. And before we go further, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you were talking to someone and realized they weren't really listening? Not because they didn't care, but because they weren't fully there? If you have, drop a comment below. And if this story is starting to feel a little too real, go ahead and like this video and subscribe, because we're only halfway through. And what's coming next will change everything. Matthew didn't plan to stay out that long. It started as a meeting, a continuation of something they had already discussed earlier in the day. The restaurant was quiet, not empty, but controlled. Low conversation, soft lighting, nothing distracting. Scarlett sat across from him, her posture relaxed, one hand resting lightly near her glass. She wasn't looking at her phone, wasn't rushing through anything. "You're less tense outside the office," she said, glancing at him briefly. Matthew looked up from his plate. "Am the first?" "A little," she replied. He considered that for a second, then gave a small shrug. "Less people asking for things." Scarlett nodded. "That helps." The conversation moved easily. No effort, no searching for topics. They spoke about work at first, then moved away from it, without noticing exactly when. "You ever take a full day off?" she asked. Matthew let out a quiet breath, leaning back slightly. "Not really." Scarlett tilted her head a little. "That sounds exhausting." "It's normal," he said. She didn't argue with that, didn't suggest otherwise. "That makes sense," she replied. That was the rhythm between them. Nothing pushed, nothing pulled. Matthew reached for his glass. That's when his phone lit up on the table beside him. He didn't look at it immediately. It buzzed once, then again. Scarlett's eyes flickered toward it briefly, not intentionally, just noticing movement. Matthew glanced down. Rebecca. The name sat clearly on the screen. For a second, nothing happened. His hand hovered slightly closer to the phone, not touching it, just there. The vibration stopped. Scarlett picked up her glass, taking a small sip. She didn't say anything. Matthew looked at the screen again. Still lit, still waiting. There was no urgency in the room, no pressure, Just a quiet moment stretched between two choices. He picked up the phone halfway, paused. "Everything okay?" Scarlett asked, her tone casual, not even fully directed at him. Matthew glanced at her, then back at the phone. "Yeah," he said. "It's, nothing." He turned the phone over, screen down, the light disappeared, and just like that, the moment passed. No announcement, no shift in the atmosphere. Scarlett continued speaking, something about a project timeline. Something light. Matthew responded, nodded, even smiled slightly. The conversation continued, and for a while, Rebecca's call wasn't in his mind anymore. It didn't feel like a decision. It felt like timing, like something that could be handled later, something that wasn't urgent. Matthew leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. "You mentioned adjusting that rollout earlier," he said. Scarlett nodded, picking up the thread without hesitation. "Yeah, it'll give us more room to respond if anything shifts." He listened, focused again, because that was what he did. He handled what was in front of him, and in that moment, Rebecca wasn't. Outside, the city moved the same way it always did. Cars passing, people heading home, lights stretching across the streets. Inside, nothing felt out of place. No raised voices, no tension, no sense that anything important had just been ignored. Just a quiet decision. That didn't feel like one. Rebecca didn't make the call right away. She sat in her car first, engine off, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel. The day had been long, not in the way that filled her schedule, but in the way that stayed with her. She had spent hours at the center, listening more than speaking, one conversation after another, stories that didn't belong to her, but still settled somewhere inside her. By the time she left, the energy she usually carried felt quieter, not gone, just used. She leaned back slightly in her seat, closing her eyes for a second, breathing, letting the noise of the day fade without forcing it. Her phone rested in her lap, unlocked. She looked at it, then away, then back again. It wasn't hesitation from uncertainty. She knew exactly who she wanted to call. She just wasn't sure what she would get when she did. That thought didn't stop her, but it slowed her down. There was a time when this part didn't exist, when reaching for her phone felt automatic. No pause, no second thought. Now, she sat there a little longer, just enough to notice the difference. Finally, she tapped his name. The call connected. She lifted the phone to her ear, listening. The ringing filled the space around her. Soft, steady. She stared through the windshield, watching nothing in particular. Once, twice, 3 times. She didn't move, didn't adjust, just listened. There was no frustration in her expression, no visible reaction, just quiet attention. The ringing stopped. She lowered the phone slightly, looking at the screen. Call ended. Rebecca didn't call again. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a second, then dropped back to her lap. She exhaled slowly, leaning her head back against the seat. That was it. No message, no follow-up. Not because she didn't want to, because she didn't feel like repeating herself. She sat there for a moment longer, still. Then she reached forward, starting the engine. The car hummed softly beneath her. She pulled out onto the road, moving through the city without rushing. Lights passed, cars moved around her. Everything normal. But something had settled. Not something new, something confirmed. She drove without turning on music, without filling the silence. Just thinking, not about what he was doing, not about where he was, about herself, about the feeling that had been building for a while now. She turned into a quiet area, parking near a familiar spot, one she had been to before. The city stretched out in front of her from a distance, lights scattered across the view. She stepped out of the car, closing the door gently behind her. The air was cooler here. Still, she walked a few steps forward, then stopped. Her phone remained in her hand. Screen dark. She didn't check it, didn't expect it to light up. That part mattered more than anything else. Expectation had changed, not disappeared, just lowered. She sat down slowly, resting her elbows lightly on her knees. There was something she had wanted to share, something important, something good. It stayed with her, unspoken, and for the first time, it didn't feel urgent to say it anymore. Rebecca looked out at the city, her expression calm, not distant, not upset, just clear. That clarity didn't come from one moment. It came from many. And this one, this missed call, didn't start anything. It simply showed her where things already stood. She took a slow breath, then let it go, not holding on to anything, not reaching for anything, just sitting with it. The evening didn't end abruptly. It stretched, calm, uncomplicated. Matthew and Scarlett remained at the table longer than necessary, not because there was more to discuss, because neither of them felt the need to leave. "You always stay this late?" Scarlett asked, glancing toward the window briefly. Matthew followed her gaze for a moment. "Sometimes," he said. She nodded. "That explains a lot." He looked back at her. "Like what?" "You're used to long hours," she replied. "You don't seem affected by them." Matthew leaned back slightly. "It's part of it." Scarlett didn't question it, didn't suggest anything different. That made the moment easy to stay in. Time passed without pressure, without interruption. Eventually, they stood, walked out. The night air settled around them as they stepped onto the sidewalk. "I'll send you that update in the morning," Scarlett said. "All right," Matthew replied. A brief pause. Then she nodded once and walked in the opposite direction. Matthew watched her go for a second, then turned toward his car. He unlocked it, got in, and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. Silence filled the space. He reached for his phone. The screen lit up. One missed call. Rebecca. Matthew stared at it. For a second, nothing moved. Then he tapped the screen, opening the call log. The timestamp was recent, not long ago. His fingers rested against the phone. Still, something about it felt off, not urgent, not alarming, just noticeable. Rebecca hadn't called again. That was the first thing. She usually did. Even if it was just once more. Matthew leaned back slightly in his seat, phone still in his hand. He checked his messages. Nothing. No follow-up. No "call me when you can." Just the missed call. That's when the feeling shifted from neutral to something less clear. He tapped her name, pressed call. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. No answer. Matthew pulled the phone away slightly, looking at it. He pressed call again. This time, it rang once, then went silent. Voicemail. He exhaled through his nose, sitting forward slightly now. "All right," he muttered under his breath. It still didn't feel serious. Not fully, but it didn't feel normal either. He checked the time again, then looked out through the windshield. The street was quiet. Cars passing occasionally. Nothing unusual, but his attention had shifted. The ease from earlier had faded, not replaced with panic, just discomfort. A thought crossed his mind. Quick, uninvited. Why didn't she call back? He didn't answer it. Instead, he started the car. The engine came to life. He sat there for another second, then reached for his phone again, scrolled to her name, paused, then called. It rang longer this time. Still no answer. Matthew tightened his grip on the steering wheel slightly. Not enough to draw attention, just enough for him to notice it. That's when the shift happened. Not dramatic, but real. The moment from earlier, the one that didn't feel like a decision, returned. Clearer now. He saw it again. The screen lighting up. Her name, his hand hovering, the phone turning over. And for the first time, it didn't feel small. He leaned back again, staring at the dashboard. "I'll just go check," he said quietly. Not rushed, not panicked, just decided. He put the phone down, shifted the car into drive, and pulled out onto the road. The city stretched ahead of him. Familiar, predictable, but something had changed. Not outside, inside. And before we move forward, think about this. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have answered the call? Or told yourself you'd get back to it later? Let me know in the comments. And if you've ever had a moment like this, where something small turned out to matter more than you expected, make sure you like this video and subscribe, because what Matthew is about to face next, he's not prepared for. Matthew didn't drive fast at first. He pulled onto the road the same way he always did. Controlled, steady, measured. But his attention wasn't where it usually was. The road stretched ahead of him, Familiar streets lined with lights that blurred slightly as he moved through them. Cars passed, signals changed. Everything followed its normal rhythm. Except him. His hand tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Not enough to lose control. Just enough to feel it. He glanced at his phone again, resting in the passenger seat. Dark, silent. Rebecca still hadn't called back. He reached over, picked it up, and pressed her name again. The call rang. He didn't look away this time. 1 ring, 2, 3, voicemail. Matthew ended the call quickly, dropping the phone back onto the seat. All right. He muttered under his breath. The word didn't settle. He exhaled, adjusting his grip on the wheel. His eyes moved quickly between the road and the empty space ahead of him, like he was expecting something to appear that would explain everything. It didn't. The next turn came up faster than he expected. He took it without slowing as much as he normally would. That's when he noticed it. He wasn't driving the way he usually did. Not reckless, but not precise either. Another glance at his phone. Still nothing. Matthew leaned forward slightly, his posture shifting. That feeling from earlier, the one he brushed off, had changed. It wasn't just discomfort anymore, it had weight now. His mind started moving faster. Not structured, not organized, just jumping. Where would she be? He thought about it. Quickly. Home? No. If she were home, she would have answered. The thought came without hesitation. He turned onto another street, the city shifting around him as he moved deeper into it. Then something clicked. A memory. Rebecca standing beside him once, pointing out over the city. This is where I come when I need quiet, she had said. Matthew blinked, his focus sharpening. That place. He adjusted his direction immediately. The car moved faster now, not aggressively, but with intent. Lights passed more quickly. Buildings blurred at the edges. His breathing shifted, still controlled, but no longer steady. He picked up the phone again. Called. The ringing filled the car. He didn't lower the volume, didn't look away. Come on, he said quietly. No answer. The call ended. This time, he didn't hang up right away. He listened to the silence for a second longer before pulling the phone away. That's when it hit. Clear, not loud, not dramatic, just undeniable. She had called him, and he didn't answer. Not because he couldn't, because he chose not to. Matthew tightened his jaw slightly, his grip on the wheel firm now. The moment replayed in his mind. The phone lighting up, her name on the screen, his hand hovering, then flipping it over. That small movement. It didn't feel small anymore. It felt final. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head once as if trying to push the thought away. But it stayed. What if? He started, then stopped. He didn't finish the thought. He didn't want to. The car slowed slightly as he approached the area. Familiar. Quiet. He turned in, pulling toward the overlook. The city opened up in front of him, lights stretching across the distance. Still, unchanged. Matthew parked quickly, the engine barely settling before he reached for the door. He stepped out. The air felt sharper now. He scanned the area. At first, nothing. Then, he saw her, sitting still, facing the city, not moving. Matthew stopped for a second. Not because he didn't want to go to her, because something in that moment told him this wasn't going to be simple. Matthew didn't rush toward her. He walked, measured, but not controlled the way he usually was. Each step felt heavier than it should have. Rebecca. His voice didn't carry far, but it reached her. She turned slightly, not startled, not surprised, just aware. You came, she said. It wasn't relief. It wasn't a question, just acknowledgement. Matthew stopped a few steps away from her, close enough to see her clearly, not close enough to feel settled. I saw your call, he said. I tried calling back. Rebecca nodded once. I know, she replied. There was a pause, the kind that didn't feel empty. It felt full of things neither of them had said yet. Matthew shifted his weight slightly. I didn't know. He started, then stopped. He didn't finish the sentence, because he wasn't sure how to. Rebecca looked out toward the city again. It's okay, she said. That word didn't land the way he expected. It didn't sound like forgiveness. It sounded like distance. Matthew took a step closer. What did you need? He asked. Rebecca didn't answer right away. She rested her hands lightly against her knees, her fingers still. I got some news today, she said. Matthew straightened slightly. What kind of news? Rebecca let out a small breath. Not heavy, just steady. The program, she said. We got the partnership. Matthew blinked once. The one you've been working on? She nodded. It's confirmed, she added. Funding, expansion, everything. For a second, he didn't respond. Not because he didn't understand, because it took a moment to fully register what she had just said. That's big, he said finally. Rebecca gave a small nod. Yeah, another pause. Matthew ran a hand lightly across the back of his neck. That's incredible, Rebecca, he said. You've been working toward that for a long time. She looked at him then. I know, she replied. Her voice didn't rise, didn't carry excitement, just truth. I wanted to tell you, she added. The words settled between them. Matthew's expression shifted, not visibly at first. But enough. You did, he said. Rebecca shook her head slightly. No, she said softly. I tried. That difference mattered. Matthew looked down for a second, then back at her. I should have answered, he said. This time, the words didn't feel like something he was supposed to say. They felt real. Rebecca studied him for a moment. You didn't, she replied. No anger, no accusation, just a fact. Matthew exhaled slowly, stepping closer now. I didn't think it was something urgent, he admitted. Rebecca nodded again. That's the part, she said. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? She held his gaze. It mattered to me, she said. Simple, direct. Matthew didn't respond immediately, because there was nothing to correct in that. I wasn't calling because something was wrong, she continued. I was calling because something went right. That hit differently. Matthew looked away for a second, then back at her. I didn't know, he said. Rebecca's expression didn't change. I know, she replied. That word, again, not sharp, not soft, just clear. Matthew sat down beside her, leaving a small space between them. I've been distracted, he said. Rebecca let out a quiet breath. I've noticed, she replied. He nodded once. I didn't think it was this bad, he added. Rebecca turned slightly toward him. It didn't start this way, she said. Matthew listened, really listened. You didn't stop caring, she continued. You just stopped being there the same way. He looked at her, his brow tightening slightly. I'm still here, he said. Rebecca shook her head gently. Not like before. Silence. Matthew didn't argue, because he couldn't. Rebecca leaned back slightly, her gaze drifting back toward the city. There was a time when I didn't have to think before calling you, she said. Matthew swallowed lightly. I remember, he replied. She nodded. Now I do. That sentence stayed longer than anything else she had said. Matthew looked down briefly, his hands resting loosely together. I can fix this, he said. The words came out steady, but they didn't carry the certainty they used to. Rebecca turned back toward him. I'm not asking you to fix it, she said. Matthew frowned slightly. Then what are you asking? Rebecca held his gaze. I'm asking you to see it, she replied. And for the first time, he did. Not just the missed call, everything around it. The distance, the silence, the way moments had changed without him noticing. Matthew leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. I didn't realize how far it had gone, he said. Rebecca nodded slowly. That's why I called, she replied. Not to fix anything, not to confront him, just to share something that mattered. And now, it didn't feel the same anymore. The space between them stayed quiet for a moment, not empty, just settled. Matthew sat beside Rebecca, his hands loosely clasped, his posture no longer as composed as it used to be. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't trying to control the outcome of the moment. He was just in it. There's something else, he said. Rebecca didn't turn immediately, but she heard it in his tone. What is it? She asked. Matthew exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed ahead. I've been spending time with someone, he said. The words didn't rush out. They landed carefully. Rebecca nodded once. I figured, she replied. That answer stopped him more than any reaction would have. You did? He asked. Rebecca turned slightly toward him now. You didn't hide it, she said. Not completely, Matthew frowned faintly. I wasn't trying to. I know, she interrupted gently, and she meant it. He hadn't made a plan to betray her. He hadn't built something in secret. He had just allowed something to grow in the space where he stopped paying attention. Matthew looked down briefly, then back up. It didn't feel like it meant anything at first, he admitted. Rebecca studied him. And now? She asked. Matthew didn't answer right away. Because now, it did. Not in the way he once thought, but in what it revealed. I don't think I understood what I was doing, he said. Rebecca nodded slowly. That doesn't make it smaller, she replied. It wasn't harsh. It was honest. Matthew leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees again. I thought things between us were just changing, he said. Rebecca tilted her head a little. They were, she said. He looked at her. But not the way you told yourself. That landed. Matthew didn't push back, because there was nothing to argue with. Rebecca let out a slow breath, her eyes drifting toward the city once more. I think, she began, then paused, not searching, just choosing her words carefully. I think I needed you not to answer. Matthew turned toward her immediately. What do you mean? He asked. Rebecca met his gaze. If you had picked up, she said, her voice steady. I would have shared my news. You would have said the right things. And I probably would have stayed in the same place. Matthew's expression tightened slightly. But you didn't answer, she continued. She didn't raise her voice, didn't shift her tone, and that showed me something I've been trying not to see. Matthew swallowed lightly. And what's that? He asked. Rebecca held his gaze. That I've been holding on to something that isn't there the same way anymore. The words settled heavily, not because they were loud, because they were clear. Matthew shook his head slightly. It's still there, he said. Rebecca didn't respond right away. She let the silence sit between them for a second. Maybe parts of it are, she said, but not enough for me to keep pretending everything feels the same. Matthew sat back slightly, his chest tightening in a way he couldn't ignore. Now, I can be better, he said. Rebecca nodded. I believe you can, she replied. That wasn't the answer he expected. But that doesn't mean I should wait for you to figure it out, she added. That was the moment. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. Matthew looked at her, searching for something, anything, that suggested this could be turned around quickly. There wasn't anything. Rebecca stood up slowly. Matthew followed her movement with his eyes, then stood as well. I didn't lose you tonight, he said quietly. Rebecca looked at him. No, she replied. Her voice didn't break. This has been happening for a while. Matthew exhaled, running a hand across his face. I didn't see it, he said. Rebecca gave a small, understanding nod. I know, she replied. That was the truth of it. He didn't see it. And now, he did. Rebecca stepped back slightly, not rushing, not avoiding, just creating space. I'm not angry, she said. Matthew looked at her, surprised. I'm just clear. That word carried more weight than anything else she had said. Clear about what she felt. Clear about what had changed. Clear about what she needed to do next. Matthew nodded slowly. For the first time, he didn't try to fix anything, because he understood this wasn't something he could correct in a single moment. Rebecca gave him one last look, not cold, not distant, just real. Then she turned and walked away. Matthew stood there, watching her go, not calling after her, not stopping her, because now he finally understood what that missed call meant. Not just a moment he ignored, but everything he failed to notice before it. And before we end this story, think about this. How many times have we assumed there would always be another moment? Another call, another chance to show up the right way. But sometimes, the moment that feels small is the one that changes everything. If this story made you reflect, even for a second, drop a comment below. Share your thoughts. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Mr. Gray Family, because stories like this aren't just meant to be heard, they're meant to be felt.